What if you could skyrocket your credibility and turn on a faucet of raving fans doing something that you love to do? In this week's podcast, I'm going to take you behind the scenes with a well-loved, fast-growing icon in the entrepreneurial world, John Lee Dumas, an entrepreneur on fire. Hey, it's Melanie Benson here. I'm America's leading small business optimizer, and this weekly series is all about the little things that put massive power and position you to grow exponentially in your business. And I couldn't think of anybody more perfect to bring on the weekly show than Mr. John Lee Dumas himself. Now, let me tell you a little bit about John. John is the founder and host of Entrepreneur on Fire, a top-ranked business podcast that interviews today's most inspiring and successful entrepreneurs 7 days a week. Now, he's had people like me, of course, but Seth Godin and you've had Timothy Ferriss and some other really, big mega stars. I think I've been watching the list growing and growing and growing. And I got to tell you, this is one of those podcasts that I download onto my iPhone. And when I'm going for my walks or I'm in the car for a long drive, I've got John on. As a matter of fact, when we got on the line, it's like I hear his voice and I'm like, that's the guy that talks to me every day. And, I met John because a friend of mine had done the show with him, and he said, you have got to meet this guy. He's on fire. He's doing really cool stuff. He gets more downloads than anybody I know with his podcast. And he literally is walking and living every day what he's showcasing, which is being an entrepreneur on fire. So John, welcome to the podcast here.
Melanie, thanks for having me on. And yes, you are one of my treasured guests, right next to Barbara Corcoran, right next to Forbes Riley. There's you.
I'm going to get that on a quote. So, John, why don't we just really quick model the beautiful t-shirt that you're wearing. Talk about living and breathing it. Entrepreneur
this just came in
on
yesterday.
Fire. Woohoo! I love it. So, all right. Let's talk about Entrepreneur on Fire and where it came from and what was the catalyst for you to create this show, really, interviewing people that I'm assuming you were fascinated with.
Well, Melanie, we talked a little bit in the pre-interview about awaken that leader inside you and just really awaken that passion inside, which is something that you do so well in people. You did it so well on Entrepreneur on Fire. And that's kind of how I relate to myself, is I was really searching for that key, that passion was going to awake that leader in myself, because for the first 32 years of my life, I had been very successful in a lot of different careers and jobs, and I was in the Army for 8 years in corporate finance and commercial real estate, but I never was passionate. So I never was able to release myself into something and just throw myself into it until literally, like you, who loves to consume podcasts and cars, I was the same. But then one day I just ran out. I ran out of podcasts and I said, wow, I love listening to podcasts almost more than anything else, especially the ones that interview these incredibly inspiring entrepreneurs who have found that passion, who have awoken that leader in themselves that I'm trying to do. Because I was thinking that that could be my key to actually awakening my passion within myself. And what ended up being the key for me was just podcasting in general. So I saw this niche that wasn't being filled, and I dove for it. I said, you know what, I am going to be that guy, that crazy guy that does 7 days a week, interviews inspiring, successful entrepreneurs. And that dream was born less than 18 months ago, Melanie. So it hasn't been a long journey, but I'll tell you, it's been an incredible journey with a lot of highs and some definite lows in there as well.
Okay, well, and I appreciate that you bring up the lows, because I think many people walk around seeing someone who's had a, quote, overnight success, and they think, oh, they're lucky, and, they just had this magical touch, or they had something that I don't have. And I think there's a lot to be said for going behind the scenes and really hearing what's really going on to create what appears to be something that overnight becomes a huge success. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit right now. Like, what were some of the challenges and bumps along the way to becoming a overnight entrepreneur on fire?
There was a ton, especially in the beginning, Melanie. I mean, I literally had that career resume of being an officer in the Army, being in corporate finance and commercial real estate, none of which had anything to do with being an online entrepreneur. So I had zero online presence. I wasn't going from, say, a fairly successful blogger to a podcaster, because that has a little bit of a correlation. I had no correlation with what I was doing. It was completely separate. I was literally pressing the reset button. Everything I had done for the first 32 years of my life really wasn't super applicable to my next major leap, which was podcasting. And so when I launched, I literally had that zero online presence. And it wasn't that easy. It was difficult. But fortunately for me, I did do one thing right amongst many things wrong. I did find a mentor who was a fellow podcaster in the industry, and she had been doing it for a number of years already, Jamie Tardy. And she had the experience, she had the knowledge, she had the connections. And that opened up a ton of doors for me that I never would have had open to me, all because I did take that leap of faith, reach out to her, invested in myself, and said, Jamie, I'm willing to pay you as my coach, as my mentor. What would that take? What would that require? Anything you say, I just want to learn from you at the beginning part of my journey, so I avoid all the mistakes that I will make if I don't have a mentor like yourself who's been there and done that. So the biggest obstacle that I faced initially was just the entire process. Like, who was I going to reach out to? Who were the right people to interview? How would I introduce myself? Like, why would they want to talk to me? I was a nobody. I had no audience. I had no skills. I had never run any kind of a show before. I was not a communications major in college. I had zero broadcasting experience. I had never really spoken into a microphone before for a long period of time. So there was a lot of things I had no idea about, challenges that I had to overcome. And getting that mentor early on, that was the game changer for me.
I love that you brought up the mentoring being the game changer, because I think a lot of people, especially if they're new or they're thinking, oh, I'll figure this out on my own, and they're trying to keep their costs down, and you kind of went the opposite way, and you went full bore into hiring somebody that would help you shortcut that path. So what do you think you really got the biggest aha out of in working with your mentor and shortcutting that process?
The importance of connections and relationships. The first thing that my mentor had me do, and again, my aha moment happened back in early June of 2012. So just about 14, 16 months ago from when we're talking right now. And I reached out to my mentor, Jamie Tardy. She said yes. And the first thing that she had me do was sign up for Blog World and to go to a conference. It was in New York City. I had never been to a conference like this before. I didn't know conferences like this existed. I didn't know that there was a whole 1,000-person conference created, and it was being spoken by entrepreneurs that were creating their own online presence and loving what they were doing and sharing their passion on stage. So I accepted her word. I bought that ticket. You know, it wasn't cheap to buy the actual admission ticket for the conference. The travel down to New York City wasn't cheap. Luckily, I have a friend in the city, so I was able to offset some costs with him and just crash on his couch. But it was still an expensive trip. And again, it was kind of adding on to this already. I was mentoring. But at the same time, this investment was really just making me more and more serious about what I was doing. All of a sudden, it was becoming real. And so being at this conference, and Jamie, I picked the right mentor, Melanie, for many reasons, but she was speaking at this conference. You know, she is a really high profile entrepreneur, and she has these connections. So after she was done with her speech, we had they had a speaker's dinner that I was then invited to. And so then all of a sudden I'm on a roof deck bar right next to Madison Square Garden with Pat Flynn, with Derek Halpern, with Corbett Barr of Think Traffic, with Cliff Ravenscraft, the podcast Answer Man. You know, people that I had already started to idolize a little bit, even in the short month period of time that I'd been in this online entrepreneurial world. So getting to shake their hands and getting to introduce myself, introduce my passions and what I was looking to do was just completely invaluable, because I was then able to get my first couple yeses from them. And I never would have got that via email. I never would have got that in any other way besides really being there, supporting them at their conferences, being able to look them in the eye, explain what Entrepreneur on Fire was going to be according to my vision. Getting those first few yeses from them was huge, because then I could go back to my little studio in Maine And again, Maine was removed from where everybody else seemed to be in the entrepreneurial world. And I was able to go back there and just with those yeses, with nothing else, and utilize that as social proof. So when I did reach out to other people in the industry and say, I would love for you to be on Entrepreneur on Fire, this is what it's going to be about. My lineup includes Pat Flynn, includes Derek Halpern, includes David Risley. Then that social proof allowed me to line up 40 interviews over the summer of 2012, my summer of fire that I call it. And I never would have had that opportunity otherwise. I would have been cold emailing people that I didn't even know. And instead of going from strength to strength, I probably would have been going from failure to failure. And that really would have been devastating because it probably would have stopped me even before I got going. So those two combinations, getting a mentor and then taking action and going to where the entrepreneurs in my niche were and meeting them face to face was so valuable, because it's even more important now, Melanie, to meet people face to face, because it's so easy to take the shortcut and just email them or just Skype them. Because, you know, back 20 years ago, all you could do was meet face to face, you know, so it wasn't this crazy of a thing to do, but now it's really special because so many people don't go that extra mile and take that shortcut. And for me, that made the whole difference in the world.
You actually brought up a couple things that I think people often don't understand the importance of, and that is the ability to get association to credibility. So by going to that event with your mentor, you actually had doors open because you were associated with somebody who had massive credibility and was seen as a leader in that industry. And that actually happened for me early on in my career. And I know that there were doors open for me by my mentor and one of my mastermind partners that would have been years and years and years to get opened. So I think that's huge. And then you also mentioned like being in a live space, you know, with social media and all of the different ways that people can connect, like you said, with Skype and email. I think oftentimes we forget that you literally shorten the life cycle of a relationship when you're in person versus trying to warm up to someone in a virtual world. So I love that you made those 2 points. So what would you say is the thing that now that you're in motion more, that if you do it and you do it well, and maybe we might even call this the part that you've optimized, because let me take a step back and actually say one of the things I admire about you, John, is that you didn't just build like a movement, and you didn't just build a community. You were on freaking fire, you know? And it's like you just went from like 0 to like 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I think in order to sustain that, you have to be able to do a few things really well. What do you think that is for you, besides the guests?
Absolutely. It's a great point. And that is one thing that I've really done well from the very beginning. And that is have systems in place. It's so easy to let your day get carried away with random things like emails or social media or X or Y or Z. When I launched, Melanie, I launched with a plan. I launched with 2 full-time virtual assistants, one that was handling all my social media, one that was handling every other mundane task that has to do with running an entrepreneurial business that I didn't want to take the time to do. Those two virtual assistants took some upfront time to train and to get up to speed. But by taking that upfront time, it saved me hours and hours on a daily basis. So I could just come in with laser focus on what I really needed to do to explode out of the starting gate and have a killer launch of Entrepreneur on Fire. And so it allowed me to build up those 40 interviews so I could stick to my guns and release a new podcast 7 days a week. It allowed me to be everywhere on social media. It allowed me to have PR campaigns going on. It allowed me to be at events. It allowed me to be here and there. It allowed me to seem like I was kind of like this octopus with my hands in like every cookie jar, when in reality, I just had a well-oiled team from the very beginning. And so many people try to add those things as they go and piecemeal. And if that's how you have to do it, that's totally fine. But for me, I was fortunately in the situation where I really could establish that all-star team from the beginning, set those systems in place. And a lot of people, Melanie, because I'll get really specific right here, told me, and these are high-level people. This is Cliff Ravenscraft, who is considered the podcast answer man. This is even my mentor, Jamie Tardy, who's been running a podcast for over 3 years now. They said, John, love your passion, love your enthusiasm. 7-day-a-week podcast, nobody can do it. It's too many interviews that will consume your life. People will get, your listeners will get burnt out and they'll leave. Is there's just no space in this industry for a 7-day-a-week podcast. And Melanie, I believe that when people are zigging, I love to zag. So when I heard the top people in my industry saying those things, I got excited. I'm like, this is what they're telling everybody. And if everybody's taking this in for what it's worth, then this is a whole blue ocean over here that nobody's come into. And I'm going to drift away from this red ocean. Everybody's doing a weekly podcast. Let me do something really different. Let me set the right systems up. So my right systems, Melanie, and this is kind of crazy because I was told many, many times by many people that I know, like, and trust, that gave me a ton of great advice in so many areas that I've utilized. But they told me, if you do a 7-day-a-week podcast, that's all you'll do all week. Well, not only do I run a 7-day-a-week podcast on a weekly basis, I actually do 8 interviews every single Monday. So I run I have 8 back-to-back interviews. It's not a short day. It's a very intense day, but by batching and by focusing on that, I'm able to get it all done.
That's extraordinary. And I'm very impressed that you have managed 7 days of podcasts, because I know what it takes to pull off 1 day of podcasts. So
I can break in here though real quick and just say it is much less than 7 times more work to run a 7-day-a-week podcast as opposed to a once-a-week podcast. It might be 3 or 4 times more work, but it's not 7 times more work, especially when you situate it like I do, by just having everything set up in the morning on Monday and just working all day and then being done at 4 p.m. And that was my day yesterday. And so I'm able to do in 8 hours a 7-day-a-week podcast.
And I can see where you're able to leverage, because that's what I do, is I typically do a whole bunch of interviews at once. So because when you're in flow and you're on a roll and there's momentum, you want to continue to keep that fire alive and keep that fire moving forward. And I think you're more productive and more, you get better results in that technique. And that's how I tell a lot of people how to optimize their time, is to kind of chunk those like tasks and activities. So it sounds like you're doing that too.
Absolutely. I'm a
Cool.
huge believer in, I'm a believer in Parkinson's law, which is tasks will expand to the time that you allot them.
Ooh, another really good nugget. I like that. So I want to ask you something. I actually haven't asked a lot of people this, but all of a sudden it's just kind of popping into my mind to see, is there a place where you have what I call that edge of overwhelm, where if you don't maybe own your process or stay in your zone, that overwhelm can creep in and take over for you?
Absolutely. My edge of overwhelm for me personally is when I get under 30 interviews in the bank. When I start seeing that I'm slipping under 30 interviews,
Okay.
because maybe I've taken a week's vacation, so I didn't do interviews that week, or maybe I had a handful of people cancel a couple days before my Mondays and didn't rebook anybody. When I start to kind of get to that 26, 25 day period, and I know that I'm less than a month of inventory, I start to be like, okay, I got to throw in an extra day of interviews here. I got to ramp it back up. I like to be between 35 and 45 interviews ahead. That's just kind of my nice buffer zone, especially when there's holidays that come into play and different things are going on and I want to take vacations or XYZ. That's my overwhelm point. And with my systems, it pretty much ensures that I never do hit that overwhelm point. And when I do, again, there's kind of like a backup system that tricks in. So I quickly get off of that overwhelm. But that's something that entrepreneurs really have to focus on, and really listen to yourself and listen to your body, because you're not going to work optimally when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling high on stress and anxiety. So I love that question, Melanie.
Yeah. Well, it's something that I see so many entrepreneurs either slide in and out of it all the time, or live in a constant perpetual state of overwhelm. And
Right.
my theory is that I think overwhelm is a mindset. It's something we tell ourselves. It's like it kicks in based on something that is happening a certain way. But then if we live in it all the time, we don't actually realize there can be a better way to do it. And I love the systems that you're talking about that you've set up, because those systems, I think systems set us free. I think a system that is designed to keep us in optimized success is our ticket to freedom. And most people who, when they're living in that creativity, we're constantly blowing up our systems and we're like, I need to create more stuff. I'll forget that system. I'll just do it later.
If I did not have a system, then I would be so chained to my computer, to my desk, to my work in general. I would be living that life that Cliff and Jamie thought I would be living without systems, because then I would be doing 1 or 2 interviews every single day and trying to set up for them, and then then wind down from them, and that can take over your life. But with the systems in place, then you can be in control.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because you can work the system rather than letting your business work you.
Yes.
Little tiny tweaks that make a huge
I hope people
impact.
are taking notes here, because there's some golden nuggets.
And they're just coming out, aren't they? It's not like we rehearsed them or anything. This is when we need those little bubbles that pop up over our head.
Yeah.
Ding.
MTV pop-up video.
Exactly. I want to go a little bit deeper with this idea of optimal success, or really optimizing our approach. And I have a feeling that along the way, one of the things you realized was that it was going to be more than just a podcast. Talk about your decision points where you went beyond having just a podcast, and maybe talk to us a little bit about the decisions behind adding different offerings.
Absolutely. And this is one thing I love talking about, because for a long time I was going to different conferences and I was speaking just specifically on podcasting in general, and just the great vehicle that podcasting is. And I truly believe in it, and I still do to this day. But over the last few months, I've really had a realization that it's more than just podcasting. The real thing that I've realized as an entrepreneur that's so important, and that I've seen over and over again with Entrepreneur on Fire, is it's about building the audience. And that's first and foremost. Podcasting is an amazing way to build an audience. Blogging, vid podcasting, all of these different things that you can do as an online entrepreneur are great ways to build an audience, but it does boil down to that audience. And you talk about the offerings and the products and services that then us as leaders of this audience can then start to offer. And one of the biggest questions that I get from my listeners here at Entrepreneur on Fire is, John, I'm looking at starting a business, or I have started a business. What do I offer my clients? What do I offer my listeners? What do I offer my customers? And it's a great question, but the answer is so simple. Build an audience and they'll tell you. And I have a couple great examples for that. So first and foremost, when I first started podcasting, I was doing a 7-day-a-week podcast. I pretty quickly built a fairly loyal following. And before I knew it, within a couple of months, I was getting over 100,000 unique downloads per month in over 100 countries. And so as the emails started coming in, and they were asking me, John, how do you do it? What are your systems? Like, how do you get these great guests? And finally, I just said, wow, I'm being asked the same questions over and over again. I'm just going to write a book. So in February of 2013, I wrote a book called Podcast Launch. It took me 1 weekend. It was 38 days. I published it on Kindle. And to this day, it's still the #1 selling book in Amazon on podcasting, with over 175 star reviews. It's a very easy, simple book to follow, but it will allow you to launch your podcast. Number 2, I kept getting emails afterwards. My audience was growing. Now it was like 300,000 unique downloads per month in over 125 countries. And so the emails kept coming in. John, I feel alone. I'm so inspired by these entrepreneurs, but there's nobody around me like them. I need support. I need this. I need that. And I said, wow, these people need a community. So Fire Nation Elite was born. And that's our elite community of mastermind members here at Entrepreneur on Fire. And I knew there was a need for it. I didn't know quite how big a need until I actually launched it. And now we had to actually close the doors about a month and a half ago, because we reached 100 members for this paid membership mastermind, which is $165 per month to be a part of. And so that's a 5-figure income stream that was opened up through my audience solely by listening to them. The most recent example is Podcaster's Paradise. I kept having people saying, John, how do I create a podcast? Your book is great, but I want to really do more of a deep dive into the creation, into the growing the audience, into the monetizing of the podcast. And so that's where Podcaster's Paradise was born. And that's where you can go, pay a one-time fee, and get lifetime membership to create, grow, and monetize your podcast with video tutorials, with a community forum, with monthly webinars with today's top podcasters. Those three components are making up this great community that, by the way, when we're speaking right now, Melanie, we haven't even launched yet. We launched in 2 days, and we've already sold over $45,000 in membership fees for Podcasters Paradise just in pre-launch, because I listen to my audience and I'm giving them what they're asking for. We'll launch in 2 days, and then I'm sure the month of November is going to be huge for Podcasters Paradise because people are just waiting for this community to exist. And so it comes down to the core of building your audience, listening to them, and then creating for them.
Wow, you just gave us such a beautiful marketing system, which is pay attention to what the people who are naturally attracted to you want and then give it to them. And, you know, it's very, I think it's very humbling when you get attached to something and you get it out there and it doesn't land well in the marketplace. And so going about it the way you are doing it is what everybody could find so much more fire behind their ideas and their concepts, because it's almost like you find out, what are you passionate about? What are they passionate about? And now how can I create something that's the win-win? And
they're looking at you as the person that they know, like, and trust. So they want you as the leader of this audience, as the leader of this tribe, to create it for them. There might be other things out there in the market. That's just proof of concept. They don't want it from that person. They want it from who they listen to on the podcast, from who they read about on the blog, from whose video cast they're watching. That's who they want it from. So that's why building the audience is huge, because your audience will be there for you.
Yeah, and they'll tell you what they want if you listen. So let's say you're here and you've been on this 2-year journey, did you say? Yeah, a little less than 2 years?
Entrepreneur on Fire launched in September of 2013. So we're at about the 14-month mark of being live.
Okay, so just over a year. If we kind of go, you mean 2012? September
Sorry,
2012. Yeah.
2012.
I was like doing the math in my head, thinking there's something wrong. I think this is a month.
You're the smart one. You're the math one here.
Yeah, not really, but yes, we'll just run with that. We'll keep that story going. So if we go back a year, and maybe even a little bit further, when the vision was created, what is one thing you know now that you wish you would have known then that could have created either more momentum or more sanity or more fulfillment along the way?
I wish, and I really hope people pay attention to this, I wish that I had not let the imposter syndrome take over right at my launch. So Seth Godin speaks so eloquently about this, Melanie.
Yeah.
The imposter syndrome is something that every human being has, where you ask yourself, why me? Why am I good enough to release this podcast, to write this blog post, to send this email, to ask this of this person? We all have these doubts and fears in our mind. President Obama has it every single day when he wakes up in the morning. It is just there. And I know you've heard me say that multiple times in my podcast, because I want people to realize that it's not just them. It truly is every single human being. It's like an innate feeling. And man, did I have that imposter syndrome. You know, I was trying to prove people wrong with my 7-day-a-week podcast. I was trying to prove people wrong with how I was doing things. And I, in my gut, felt like I was doing the right thing, and I was going to honor that, and I was going to drive forward and put my blinders on. But as long as I didn't launch, Melanie, then I could never be proven wrong. Because as soon as I launched and it failed, then people could say, see, I told you so. But they couldn't say that until I launched. So I thought, hey, if I don't launch, they can never say I told you so if this doesn't work. And that's the games that we play with ourselves. Yeah. And that's the games that I was playing with myself, because Entrepreneur on Fire was scheduled, a very strict schedule, to launch on August 15th of 2012. And that was something that my mentor and I had decided back in June. It was a very doable date. I was ready on that date, but I made up some BS excuse and I pushed it back 15 days. My mentor bought it because I really sold it. And September 1st came and I did the same thing again. And September 15th came and I did the same thing again. And so finally my mentor is like, John, I literally will fire you if you don't just launch Entrepreneur on Fire today. And she forced me to push that send button and to submit my podcast to iTunes. And the next day or 2 days later, I had 2,800 downloads of my podcast.
That's amazing.
I mean, and I was just sitting around waiting. I was waiting and waiting for God knows what. I mean, just the imposter syndrome was literally taking over my life. And that's one thing that I would really go back and say to myself in 2012. John, just launch. You are ready. You're as ready as you'll ever be. And until you actually launch, that's the point that you'll start improving. As long as you wait, you're not getting any better. You're just treading water. So if I had just started in August 15th, everything that would have happened to Entrepreneur on Fire would have happened a month faster and then some, because I would have had that momentum built up. Nothing would have been different except it would have all happened faster. And there's a few things that we're very transparent about here, Melanie. And one thing is our income report. We do a monthly income report at Entrepreneur on Fire, and we model it after Pat Flynn of Smart Passive Income, because he inspired me by being so transparent. He wasn't just talking the talk, but he was sharing exactly how he made his money, how he lost his money, things that worked, things that didn't work. And I want to emulate what he does for Smart Passive Income for bloggers. I wanted to emulate that for podcasters. So we've been releasing our income report, and October is going to be, we started on our 1-year anniversary in September, and our income report was over $50,000 for the month of September. It's going to be over $70,000 for the month of October. Now, if you think about the fact that I put myself at least a month behind by waiting, that's a lot of money.
And when you bottom line it like that, it makes it so much more real what the opportunity cost is. Every day you wait, there is a cost to the potential income you could have made.
That's the best way to put it.
Yes.
Opportunity cost. I lost 40 days of opportunity cost, which is huge when you take into account that Entrepreneur on Fire brings in over $2,000 every single day now. I mean, and I lost 40 of those days. And that's just, I hope the listeners take that and just say, I'm not ready. I'm never going to think I'm ready. So let's just go.
Yeah. So what I heard, the remedy for imposter syndrome or procrastination or whatever version of this you're running is just to get into action. And
just start.
I actually learned something a long time ago, and I thought this was such a beautiful way to look at it. And it's called the 80% plan. A lot of people wait till that plan is 100% ready, and it's never 100% ready because there's always something that you're trying to figure out. And knowing that 20% of this is going to have to get figured out on the fly anyway. So if you can get your head around and just accept that you get your plan 80% ready, and you get 80% of the stuff figured out, and then jump into action and figure the rest of that 20% out as you go along, you will discover that you actually get further faster. Because that 20%, you would have figured it out wrong anyway.
And who are you to think that you know what that 20% is going to be? Like Eric Ries, who I was fortunate to have a guest on Entrepreneur on Fire, who wrote The Lean Startup. He talks about that minimally viable product. And he talks about, who are you as an entrepreneur to know what that last 20% is? Nobody knows except for your customer. So if you're going to spend more time, spend more energy on that last 20% that you're never going to reach anyways, that you're probably doing wrong anyways, then you're hurting nobody but yourself. But if you just release it at 80% and get that customer feedback and then pivot on that feedback, you will be way better off.
Love it. Okay, so a favorite mantra or quote that you go to when it's time to pull up the fire and the inspiration for John.
It's a quote by Albert Einstein. I start Entrepreneur on Fire off with my guest's favorite success quote. And this quote has actually never been utilized on my show, except by myself when I was actually interviewed on Entrepreneur on Fire. I think it was episode 300. We did a little flipping of the tables. But it's Albert Einstein. It's try not to become a man of success, but rather become a man of value. And the reason why that quote has always resonated so well with me is because with Entrepreneur on Fire, I launched Entrepreneur on Fire hoping that it was going to become a success down the line, but knowing that if I wanted to get there, it was all about the value. It was about providing free, high-quality value on an incredibly consistent basis, building an audience because of that free value, and then, as you say so eloquently, turning on that income faucet when the time is right. So by really having that mentality of not trying to be successful, not being short-sighted, not being just going after that quick dollar, but really trying to just provide value first and foremost, that's how Entrepreneur on Fire was built.
Love it. I have never heard that Einstein quote. I actually thought I knew where you were going to go with that, and you surprised me.
Yay.
So, John, what are you most excited about that's happening next for you and Entrepreneur on Fire?
It's definitely Podcaster's Paradise. That's
Okay.
where a lot of our focus is on. We launch in 2 days. We launch on Halloween, so I'm sure this will Podcaster's Paradise will already be live by the
Okay.
time that it does. But if you go to Melanie, what's your website?
My website is successconnections.com.
So if you go to successconnections.com/paradise, we'll have a special little gift there for all the Melanie Benson listeners. But that's something we're really excited about because anybody that wants to learn how to create, grow, and monetize their podcast, whether that be a video podcast, whether that be an audio-only podcast, whether that be an interview-based podcast or a topic-based podcast, it's for everybody. It's for the beginner, the intermediate, the expert to literally create, grow, and monetize your podcast with video tutorials, with a community forum, with monthly webinars, with today's top podcasters. It really has it all. It's one of a kind. We're already nearing 200 members of Podcasters Paradise, and we haven't even launched yet. So it's already going to launch as the biggest and best community of podcasters, period. And it's only going to grow from there. I know it's going to soon number into thousands, and the bigger it gets, the more powerful it's going to be because it's going to be that community forum of engaging with other podcasters, exchanging reviews, interviews, guest lists, everything you can imagine. That's going to be the true power, and it's all going to happen there.
I love that. I love, love, love it. And by the way, we're going to put it at melaniebensonstrick.com/paradise, right?
Boom, there you go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I'm realizing that we want to put everything in one place. Awesome. Well, John, you're so amazing. I love that you are putting this podcast out in the world. I had the same experience that you did where I just felt like all the great podcasts were just dried up and I chewed through all the good stuff and then I needed more inspiration, and finding your podcast has definitely been something that I've loved, and I love sharing it with people, and I love that you came on today to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes, because here's the thing, podcasting is one of those ways that you can really position yourself as an authority quickly. You can raise the credibility factor that you have in your industry, and it's a great way to drive traffic and build that attraction piece in by having other people promote you. And it's not like anybody's like, oh, I don't want to promote you. I don't want to promote you. This is, everybody wants to promote that they've been interviewed on a great podcast. So it's a beautiful machine you've built. You do it so well. I absolutely love, love, love your energy and the fire that you create. And I'm just really grateful that our paths have crossed. So thank you for coming on today.
Well, Melanie, you truly ignited Fire Nation a short time ago, so it really was the least I could do.
Thanks. And I have to say, I got so many people tweeting me and Facebooking me saying, I love that interview. So it was really great to.
They loved it.
Yeah, I love being able to share things that people resonate with. So, all right. Thank you for being here today, for listening in. We'd love to hear what's an aha, a pivotal moment, a tip, or something that you got out of today's podcast. Share it in the comments below. Let us know what popped for you. And more importantly, what are you going to do to optimize your business with one of these insights from today's show? So, all right, we'll see you all next week.